Hello, and welcome back to the William Gomes podcast. I am William Gomes, and I'm grateful to have you here. This series is called Reading Seminar 1 and 2, Lacan's Return to Freud Revisited. In the previous episode, we situated why Jacques Lacan speaks of a return to Sigmund Freud. We saw that this return is not nostalgic and not orthodox, but diagnostic. It responds to a drift within psychoanalytic practice itself. In this episode, we need to clarify what Lacan believes had been lost. To do so, we must first reconstruct Freud's discovery with some precision before examining how that discovery was gradually transformed in post-Freudian psychoanalysis. Freud's discovery is often summarized too quickly. It is reduced to the idea that there is an unconscious or that early experiences shape later life. These statements are not wrong, but they miss what was truly radical in Freud's work. Freud did not simply discover hidden contents of the mind, he discovered that psychic life is structured by conflict that does not resolve through insight or intention. The unconscious, for Freud, is not a storehouse of forgotten memories waiting to be recovered. It is active, conflictual, and resistant. It produces effects that surprise the subject. It speaks where the subject does not intend to speak. This is why Freud privileges formations such as dreams, slips of the tongue, jokes, and symptoms. These are not accidents. They are structured disruptions. They show that the ego is not sovereign. Freud's most unsettling claim is not that the unconscious exists, but that the ego is not master in its own house. Conscious thought does not govern psychic life. On the contrary, it often rationalizes after the fact. This discovery has decisive consequences. First, it means that psychic conflict is not a developmental accident that can be outgrown. It is structural. Second, it means that speech is privileged, not because it expresses inner truth transparently, but because it betrays what the subject does not know about themselves. Third, it means that symptoms are not defects to be eliminated. They are formations that have a logic even when that logic is painful or destructive. Freud never treats the symptom simply as a sign of malfunction. He treats it as a compromise formation, a way of managing conflict that has become rigid. This is Freud's discovery. However, as psychoanalysis developed institutionally, this discovery began to shift. Increasingly, psychoanalysis aligned itself with developmental models. Psychic life was understood as a progression toward maturity, integration, and balance. Conflict was treated as something to be resolved rather than something structurally constitutive. Within this framework, the unconscious was gradually domesticated. Instead of being a site of disruption, it became something that could be integrated into conscious life. The goal of analysis shifted toward strengthening the ego, improving adaptation, and restoring harmony. Symptoms were reframed as deficits. They were signs that something had failed to develop properly or had become distorted. The task of analysis was to correct these failures. From the perspective of technique, this led to important changes. Interpretation increasingly became explanatory. The analyst told the patient what their symptoms meant. Transference was understood in relational terms as an emotional bond to be managed. Resistance was located in the patient as a reluctance to accept insight or change. None of this was necessarily done in bad faith. It emerged from a desire to make psychoanalysis effective, humane, and compatible with broader psychological frameworks. But for Lacan, something essential had been lost in the process. What was lost was Freud's insistence that conflict does not dissolve through understanding, that insight does not guarantee change, and that psychic life does not aim naturally at equilibrium. In other words, the disruptive dimension of Freud's discovery was neutralized. Where Freud insisted on division, later psychoanalysis increasingly emphasized integration. Where Freud foregrounded conflict, later practice emphasized harmony. Where Freud treated the symptom as a formation, later practice treated it as a deficit. This is the distortion Lacan identifies. It is important to stress that Lacan's critique is not anti-Freudian. On the contrary, it is a defense of Freud's most radical insights. Lacan does not accuse post-Freudian analysts of misunderstanding Freud intellectually. He suggests that they abandon Freud practically. They continued to cite Freud, but their techniques no longer allowed the unconscious to speak in the way Freud discovered. This is why Lacan insists that returning to Freud means recovering the disruptive force of Freud's discovery, not repeating Freud's formulations. It also explains why Lacan refuses to define psychoanalysis by its outcomes. If analysis aims at harmony, balance, or happiness, it has already betrayed Freud. Freud showed that the unconscious does not aim at well being, it does not seek adaptation. It insists, repeats, and disrupts. To remain faithful to Freud is to accept this discomfort. This brings us back to Lacan's decision to begin with technique. If psychoanalysis has shifted away from Freud's discovery, this shift will be visible first in how analysts listen, how they interpret, and what they aim to produce in analysis. By reconstructing Freud's discovery and showing how it was distorted, Lacan prepares the ground for a fundamental question. Is psychoanalysis still a practice that allows the unconscious to speak, or has it become a corrective psychology that manages behavior and emotion in the name of health? This question will guide everything that follows. In the next episode, we will draw a sharper line between psychoanalysis and psychology. We will examine why Lacan insists that psychoanalysis cannot be reduced to a therapeutic practice oriented toward well-being, and why this distinction has decisive consequences for analytic technique. Thank you for listening. This is the William Gomes podcast. Take care of yourself, stay curious, and if you found this episode helpful, you're very welcome to follow, share, leave a comment or a rating. I'll speak with you again soon